All right, what you're listening to there are protesters on the street over in Tel Aviv, Israel, as they protest against the ongoing war there between Israel and Hamas, hoping and pushing for a deal as they do around this time every Saturday. Now, I do want to get to the latest on the conflict here, as the Biden administration several times wanted to publicly express that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was standing in the way of a ceasefire deal with Gaza, but they chose not to, worried that it would give the Hamas terror group more leverage in those peace negotiations. The former U.S. Department spokesperson, Matthew Miller, dropped that revelation during an interview with Israeli media's Channel 13. Miller is quoted as saying, quote, "There were times that we very much wanted to go public and make clear that we thought the prime minister was being completely intransigent and making it tougher to get a deal," adding, quote, "But we discussed it amongst ourselves and we made the decision that it wouldn't accomplish anything because we had seen it in a number of cases." Former Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar pulled back from negotiations when he thought there was a division between the U.S. and Israel. Miller also saying, quote, "We wanted to speak very toughly to the government of Israel behind closed doors, but ultimately not do anything that we thought would make it harder to get a deal." That interview comes as Israel is ramping up operations over in Gaza City. Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, warning Gaza City could be destroyed if Hamas does not give in to demands, including releasing all of the hostages. Translated here, he did write on X, quote, "We approved yesterday the IDF's plan to defeat Hamas in Gaza with intense fire, evacuation of residents, and maneuvering. Soon the gates of hell will open upon the heads of Hamas's murderers and rapists in Gaza until they agree to Israel's conditions for ending the war, primarily the release of all hostages and their disarmament. If they do not agree, Gaza, the capital of Hamas, will become Rafah. Exactly as I promised, so it shall be." Do want to discuss all of this here, so let's bring in Dr. Asaf Romirowsky, the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you as always for having me.
Of course. And first off, I did want to ask you about those comments from Israel Katz. What exactly do you make of that comment? Is it anything new?
Not really. I mean, the fact of the matter is that Katz is basically echoing Netanyahu's comment. They've said all along that this is where Hamas is basically past the Rubicon and this kind of point of no return, and they need to show military force, and that's where we're in now, vis-a-vis taking over Gaza City. The fact of the matter is that everybody around Netanyahu, at least in his smaller inner circle, and Katz included, has believed that more military pressure will indeed put more pressure on Hamas and actually, show that they're serious and will eventually lead to the release of the hostages. It's a very slippery slope, as you know. Going back to your earlier visuals, I mean, the fact of the matter is that every day the hostage families and every weekend, as you pointed out correctly, are protesting. They believe that any passing day is a risk to the hostages. And it's true. We do know from those who have been released about the actual torture and the conditions that they're in. So every passing day is indeed a risk, while at the same time Hamas knows it's their only lifeline. So that tension has been going on since the beginning of the war, and they know once they give this up, they have no more leverage. That is Hamas. And so now they're back to the same old deal. And again, if you look at the parameters of this deal, not much really has changed. Hamas is still talking about a phased deal, talking about the release of 60 prisoners for each live hostage that they would be releasing. They're all life sentence prisoners, and that probably go back to fortify the Hamas base altogether. That hasn't changed, but what is changing here, and I think this is a real threat, is their conditions. Even there is now a conflict as far as the numbers that the Israeli government is putting out there. And the Trump administration mentioned the other day that there are less than 20, and up until now, the belief was that there are 20 live, and so these hostage families are feeling that they're not getting the full picture.
And as you can see, once again, we are showing this live image over Tel Aviv. You can see hundreds upon hundreds, thousands upon thousands of people that have taken to the streets there in Tel Aviv. We talked about it, but that is an ongoing situation that takes place every Saturday around this time. I did want to ask you what the latest is on the situation playing out there in Gaza City, because we know that operation is underway. There were questions about whether a deal could be reached prior to it, but what can we kind of discern from what's happening there right now?
They're going into the areas that the IDF has not got into, while at the same time, and this is part of the tension that's been going on, and it's part of the psychological warfare that you and I have been watching and observing. That is the so-called nutrition crisis that Gaza is facing. And so, what the IDF has been doing is moving the populations into safe zones, trying to flood the strip with enough aid that will come in to get to the population. The fact of the matter is, and even the United Nations acknowledges this, we are talking about the fact that between 88 to 90% of these convoys that are being delivered into Gaza are being hijacked by Hamas or Hamas fellow travelers and stealing and abusing the aid, with the idea of creating this entire theater of starvation. There are indeed problems coming into Gaza, but the people that actually are starving are the hostages themselves. But this is all part of the propaganda imagery that has been sold to the world. Europe is buying it hook, line, and sinker, and so are many outlets here in the United States, and that's indeed a problem. But as the IDF is squeezing further and further in, what they are basically at the 10-yard line. They're trying to do whatever they can to take out, which has been the objective of the war itself to begin with, the entirety of Hamas, and then try to talk about the day after tomorrow, which has been part of the issue as far as what Gaza looks like post-Hamas. Any conversation where Hamas is part of a day after tomorrow would be considered a failure. A total failure for the state of Israel, and it will be seen as a victory for Hamas and Hamas's supporters, because they are dependent on the media, they are dependent on the propaganda, and a starving Gaza is indeed, or a so-called starving Gaza for that matter, is indeed a victory for Hamas, because that indeed shows them that, again, Israel is the aggressor and they are somehow the victims of all of this and this kind of twisted reality.
And we talked about this leading into you, but the comments there from the former spokesperson for the U.S. State Department, Matthew Miller, speaking there with Channel 13, essentially saying that the Biden administration wanted to come out and disagree with Netanyahu, saying that he was making it tougher for a deal to be reached. But they held back because they thought potentially it gave Hamas more leverage. What do you make of that? But also, what would the end result have been if they did criticize Netanyahu?
Well, I take that with a grain of salt. I mean, the fact of the matter is that the Biden administration was not shy about criticizing Netanyahu. You and I have discussed this in the past. You will remember that they also threatened to withhold arms going into Gaza. The debate under the Biden administration was that famous ongoing public debate that took place between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government vis-a-vis going into Rafah, and the fact that Israel cannot go into Rafah. The Israelis indeed proven that they can go into Rafah and still be able to relocate populations around. Indeed, there is something to be said about airing the dirty laundry. I think some folks in the Biden administration understood that, but not fully internalized that. I mean, 3 weeks after the war began, individuals like Anthony Blinken and others were already talking about the day after tomorrow and a two-state solution. There is no two-state solution to have a two-state solution with. Even in the early days of the war, Hamas shouldn't be part of the equation altogether. Israel has been fighting this multi-front war for quite a long time, and the fact of the matter is that they didn't help matters. And I would argue that during the Biden administration, Israel was fighting a war with one hand behind its back in order to make sure that they're trying to make sure that Washington is happy. We did see a very different tenor and a very different, result when Trump came in. And all you have to do is look at the fact that every one of the released hostages, when they're talking about what they saw when they were in captivity, all commended Donald Trump for saying it was because of President Trump that we were released, because of the unknown and because he was seen as a much stronger and a much more forceful leader than the Biden administration was during during their time in office.
All right, Dr. Asaf Romirowsky, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything you want to add about any of this here before I let you go?
I'm good. Things are obviously changing as always on a daily and an hourly basis, but I'm good for now. Thank you.
They always are. Thank you so much. We appreciate it as always. Have a good rest of your weekend.
You too. Take care.
And I do want to take you back out live over to the streets of Tel Aviv in Israel as this protest is underway. There's no way to determine how many people are there, but it's definitely thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people that have taken to the streets, and they are calling on Netanyahu and his government there to reach a ceasefire deal and get all of the remaining hostages released. We'll keep you updated as those discussions are still ongoing.